his work is represented in several art collections, including, fittingly, the David Bowie Art Collection. So please welcome Beezy Bailey.
Thanks very much. So just to kind of continue with a less formal biography, I was a child of the 70s. And when I was 12, I went to a friend's birthday in Johannesburg, where I grew up, and all the kids were in pulled-up socks and shoes, and I put Nivea all over my face and covered it in glitter. I must have seen a photograph somewhere of glam rock coming my way. And when I went to England for the first time, the writer James Fox, who was a friend of the family, took me down the King's Road, which was for me coming to heaven, which was the kind of last whiff of the great 60s, 72 I think it was. And I bought clogs with studs on, and jeans with peace signs and apples on, and a denim jacket with stars on. I went to Bieber before it closed down and got that musty whiff of the last of the 60s, that kind of smell of slight decay and glamour, and got a purple ring with a bobble on, and went to another kid's birthday in Johannesburg, and they looked at me like I was from another planet. And I might have come from the same planet, I realized, as Mr. Bowie. I was at that stage a huge Beatles fan, but of course Bowie was there. And as I grew up, I was never a huge, in fact, I was a fan of the Beatles. I was a proper fan. That word fan went away when I was invited to the celebrity tennis match at Ellis Park in the early 70s by friends, and the guests of honor were Liz Taylor and Richard Burton, and Ringo Starr was present. And I asked him for his autograph 6 times, and each time he said no. And finally, I asked a famous person to ask him, and he signed it for the famous person. And I just thought, well, fuck you. And that was the end of my love affair with the Beatles in that sense. I thought, if you can't give a kid your autograph, but you've got to give it to a famous person, then I'm not your friend anymore. And I never asked anybody else for their autograph, and I never was a fan of anybody else. But when I met my wife the first time, I did say to her, the only person in the world I want to meet is David Bowie. So the years rolled by, and I had kind of set out to be a pop star, and I played the drums quite well, and I sang descant and won all sorts of Eisteddfods, and my mother wheeled me out to sing left, right, and centre. And then I played the drums in Standard 6, and I did a kind of cover of Rodriguez, Cold Fact. And Leanne Cohen, I overheard Leanne Cohen in our class saying, I only came to this party because I felt sorry for Beezy. And that was the end of my career as a pop star. It's little things like that who can steer you in all directions in life. But that was the end of me as a pop star. But nonetheless, I still had aspirations to do that. So music was always an integral part of my work, and somehow my mother was very pushy with my sister as a great cellist, and she was a pianist, and somehow I felt I could escape the, how can you say, the dominance of my mother by painting or making art, where in a certain way that I can't blame my mother, but that certainly played a role. I also I was hopeless at school and only managed to make art. I used to do people's biology drawings and get 5 cents and 10 cents for their biology drawings. But anyway, so I'm just trying to find the pattern in my early years of how I kind of fitted into Mr. Bowie's world in some way. But basically, fast forward to the mid-90s, and a journalist friend of mine called Samantha Weinberg, who is a freelance journalist, South African based in London, called me to say that Bruce Weber, the photographer, was coming out with Vogue magazine to shoot photos of Iman. And Bowie was coming along with me, and he's interested in writing about and checking out South African art. And it was the first and I think the last Johannesburg Biennale at the time. And he rocked up in Cape Town, and my hero arrived at my front door to interview me for the Modern Painters magazine. And that was quite something, to have David Bowie rocking up at your house to interview you for a magazine. But he couldn't have been more, normal and put me at ease immediately. And we immediately hit it off in terms of having a schizophrenic brothers in common. He had a schizophrenic brother who finally threw himself in front of a train and said that he'd be walking down the street and suddenly see fire in front of him and scream. And my schizophrenic brother's still alive, but he hears voices rather than sees things, but we have that in common. And then, of course, he wrote the Aladdin Sane album around that tragedy, really. Anyway, so for the interview that we had planned, I suggested that we paint together because I said, were you at art school? So he said, well, like most rock stars, I started off at art school. And so, again, I said, well, let's do some painting together. Instead of just sitting with a microphone, let's do some painting. So he was very excited about this and phoned me from the Mount Nelson and said, should he go and buy some paints? And so I said, no, I've got plenty of paints at the studio. And he came up, and we did this and another one called, it's a surrealist game called Exquisite Corpses, where you do, and you fold the paper. I'm sure you know this game, and you draw the middle, and you draw little legs, and the person carries on with the picture. And we did that to kind of break the ice and start the thing. So he did, I did the top section, he did the middle, a rude section, and I did the bottom section of this particular image, which we put onto a T-shirt, and there was a second image as well. But it seemed to gel so nicely, we kind of got on very well, that he then suggested that I came over to New York a few months later and continue the collaboration. And so I went over to New York, and there he was in his Fifth Avenue office called Isolar, and I asked him why it was called that, and he said isolated. And I said that kind of fame is very isolating for someone like that. And Julian Schnabel was shooting the film Basquiat at the time, and he was acting as Andy Warhol. Now, this is quite ironic because years earlier, when I first went to New York, I stayed with a friend who was dating Kerry Kennedy, the daughter of Robert Kennedy, and we became mates. We were kind of sharing this apartment. And because it was the energy and the kind of vibe of early 80s, I was hugely inspired to start painting on the spot, and I started making these paintings. And she then said, do you want to come meet Andy? It didn't take much of a guess to know who she was talking about, and I said, of course. So I went and had lunch with Andy Warhol. And before that, I was not sure about becoming an artist in this country because I'd grown up knowing Norman Catherine and Judith Mason, and they were famous, but they didn't have any money. And I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I wanted money, not just, so many people say, I don't care about money, I'll just make art. Well, I'm ambitious so-and-so, so I wanted money, I wanted a Rolls Royce and all sorts of things. And so my father said, why don't I become an artist? And I said, I won't make enough money. It has to be the only time that's happened in that order. And then it took me meeting the great Andy Warhol to realize that I could do what I loved doing most and make money. So I walked out of his factory deciding I'd never do anything else. And I was invited back, excuse me, a few weeks later. And then he put me in touch with this gallerist called Tony Shafrazi. And he said, what are your plans? And I said, I'm going to go to London to learn how to draw. And I had been thrown into the deep end. The two other artists that he represented of my age are both, well, one was younger, but both dead now, Basquiat and Keith Haring. And I honestly believe if I'd stuck around then, I don't think I'd be talking to you here today, because I might not have made it through those wild years in New York. And also, I really thought it was important to learn how to draw. And so I rocked up at art school in London and started thinking of the world of myself because I'd met the great Warhol and nothing could touch me, and did these kind of rather bad surrealist paintings inspired by Dali. And they called me in at the end of first term and said, what are your plans? And I said, I'm going skiing. They said, huh. And then they pointed they pointed at this picture on the wall, and they said, there's a landscape. Have you ever thought of doing a landscape? I said, no. He said, listen, if you don't do some serious work this holiday, you can forget about coming back next term. So I sat in the Alps doing my first landscape on a cardboard box in oil. And I was discovered later on that the only reason they kicked my backside is they saw some potential. Otherwise, they would have just let me get on dawdling away. So I went into the life room and did landscapes for the rest of my life, completely different to the other work that I do, and spent 2 years working from models, which I think gave me an essential foundation, which is so lacking in so many young artists today, of just traditional drawing and looking and seeing.
And so how old are you?
21. Yeah. Anyway, so then back to Bowie and New York and coming back. So it was very bizarre seeing Bowie dressed as Andy Warhol, acting superbly as Andy Warhol in this outstanding film that I imagine quite a few have seen, Basquiat, that Schnabel made. And Schnabel, of course, I think is a better filmmaker than a painter. But so he was concurrent while we did 50 paintings together in a studio that Schnabel had organized for us. He was doing one of the best albums he'd ever done, called Outside, and acting as Warhol in this movie. So I described his energy as demonic. He was 49 at the time, and it was just unbelievable. And of course, he's smart, but at one stage I got really upset with him a few years later, and I said that he was a vampire sucking my blood out, and that he just used me. He was quite upset about that, but I had felt that at one stage afterwards, but I mean, it wasn't negative like that at all. And in fact, when we were together, it was wonderful, but one did realize that he was using very much he was using all three creative forms, acting, painting, and music, concurrently, and letting one feed the other. And he called me at the time Space Boy, and in the Outside album, there's the song Space Boy, but I'm not so vain to think that this song is about me. Where are we going? So this is now, there's no particular order of the collaboration that we did, but this has got an amazing story behind it, and quite a tragic one. My father used to run Drum magazine and across Africa, and his manager in Accra, I think it was. Is Accra by the sea? I don't even know, my geography is not very good. But yeah, anyway, in Accra, he had to fire his circulation manager for stealing money. And he said to him, why have you done this? You're a great guy. What's the problem? Why have you stolen money? And he says, well, there's this belief in our society that of the Mami Wati, the water goddess. And he had to give her money to bring him eternal luck and everything else. And it transpired that a local pimp had been painting up a lady of the night in effervescent paint, who would emerge from the waves and take his money and disappear again. But so entrenched was this belief of the Mami Wati that this is what happened. And he also, my father, collected bronzes and wrote books about the Bronze Age, and had amongst his collection quite a rare mermaid. So I told David about this, and he was intrigued, and this emerged. So when we worked together, it was very much 50-50, like it is when I work with Brian Eno, which I'm still doing, where we literally work on the same painting at the same time, but we do several at the same time, hence us doing about 50 paintings during the 2-week period that we worked. And the Mami Wati painting, I think it's incredibly powerful, painting, and somehow captures the tragedy of post-colonial Africa. This is more abstract, very much. What we were doing is picking up pieces on the street in Soho and downtown New York, where we were working. A piece of rusty, kind of Victorian ceiling and then we bought some perspex and put it on the painting. He had early Apple, this is what, 94, 95. So he had an early Apple computer in his office where he took a photograph of himself and then manipulated it and ended up with this really creepy image in the middle. And then there's this kind of, I think, quite a professorial thing going on here, because here you have the Twin Towers, and we, I don't know what's going on with the sound here. I don't know. Nowhere. We called it Olympic Knife Man. We used a Giacometti dog there, kind of pornographic image on his head there, and then this giant running over New York. It was one of the few that we stole. It was on my first AIDS orphans auction that I organized in Cape Town, and somebody bid the princely sum of 15,000 rand for it. But another very much typical of what we were doing. And this one he actually used on his outside album cover. I did not do this with him. And it's, you can see, it's very much a self-portrait of him. And we did these two huge paintings. I mean, they were bigger than this, of each other. He looked at me and I looked at him. And we painted each other. That's his painting of me, and that's mine of him. And I asked him to pose as if he was Christ on the cross, and then you remove the cross and it looks like you're dancing. And ironically, I then went on to do a whole series called the Dancing Jesus. I did that in pure gold, actually. But just to kind of give you anecdotes, because I don't have a lot of the slides. For some reason, we were very difficult to find all of the pictures that we did together, and it gives you a pretty good overview of what we've done. But I'm just trying to think of various moments during those 2 weeks that come to mind, walking around the streets of New York with him. There were some quite interesting moments where, for instance, a mounted policeman on a cobbled street in Soho recognized him and started shouting, "Boy!" Like he almost fell off his horse, you know. And there was quite often these kind of extraordinary reactions from people recognizing him, and other times he was very aware of weirdos, and he kind of, at one stage, I was totally unaware, and he said, "I'm not sure about that man." He said, "Oh, no, it's okay, he's just a fan." And having to kind of live this life must have been very strange. But there was a very amusing time when we were in Fifth Avenue, and I thought I spotted Jeff Koons. And he said, "Where?" And we were running after this man who wasn't Jeff Koons, and I thought, what the hell is going on here? Sorry, this is David Bowie running after someone who we think is Jeff Koons. There was something quite strange about that. He was very, he had for years done enormous amounts of cocaine, and I said, "What stopped you?" And he said he woke up one morning and his brains were on the pillow next to him, and that stopped him. But he was still smoking at that stage, and we sat down to lunch, and he had 3 double espressos, which is pretty speedy stuff. But I mean, what he liked about the cocaine, he said, it was so amazing because he could do so much. So he would stay up all night and work, and that for him was what is so exciting. I tried to think of other moments around New York with him and things he said and did. It was just he had a fabulous, wicked English sense of humor, and it was just his energy, and to be with such a great mind, inquiring. And I must say, who's very similar is Brian Eno, I have the privilege of being a friend of as well. A very similar mind, almost childlike, of constantly being interested and inquiring and open. And it was really, it was very special. And then, towards the end of our collaboration, Ingrid C. she came up, who's actually a former South African. She was the editor of Interview magazine. And then finally, his assistant of many years came up with a kind of camera team from his office to take photographs and video. And she said she could not believe the chemistry between us. And then we continued the friendship over the following 25 years. I only saw him once more when he performed in London in a concert. And I kind of got the feeling, of course, he'd moved on, and Hibisi, and kind of talked to all sorts of other people. And but we did maintain a pretty intimate email relationship over the years, sending images to each other and notes to each other. And before emails, there were telephone calls, and I missed those calls, and I missed that sound of his voice on the other end of the line. And then before before he died, I was in Plettenberg Bay, in my house that then burnt down last year. And I had my toenails painted up the window, and I sent him a photograph of them, and I said, I actually had the video, the email somewhere, and I said, lots of Happy New Year, love from Twinkle Toes, and he wrote back to say, you should call that nude, lots of love, David. And then he went and died a few days later. And I did painting, literally, I think, if not a day, then 2 days before he died, in Plet. And I had no idea that in this extraordinary video, which you'll see now, he had mentioned the lyric. Well, of course, his lyrics are extraordinary, and I suggest you listen to them, because they are quite philosophical and very powerful. And I was listening to them this morning in my car, songs that we've all heard over and over again, and you suddenly notice, my God, that line really blows my mind, And anyway, it's like free like a bluebird, And here I was painting a bluebird flying away, without any knowledge. These lyrics were in the song, his final swan song, and this extraordinary video that only Bowie would do, literally capturing his demise and his death. And not even Brian Eno knew, no one knew that he was dying. It was top secret. He did send Brian a very moving email, almost saying goodbye and saying we did such great things together. So now we want to put the video on of Lazarus. You're listening to it, you'll hear the bluebird line.
Look up here, I'm in heaven. I've got scars that can't be seen. I've got drama, can't be stolen. Everybody knows me now. Look up here, man, I'm in danger. I've got nothing left to lose. brain world. Drop my cell phone down below. Ain't that just like me?
Yeah, so there you have it. There isn't much more to say. I mean, so, there I was in Plet, and my best friend Baron Tibet, also now dead, phoned to say Bowie's dead. And I didn't have any response, and then I was worried that the garden outside would hear me sobbing. And then I went to visit a friend, and suddenly then all the media started phoning, and the BBC flew in to interview me, and I showed them the picture of the bluebird painting. I think, that's it. It's the spirit that remains, and a creative brother. So if there's any questions.
How soon after the video did
He died and the video was immediately released. He died and then the video was released.
Yeah, but he was pretty ill when the video was made.
You can see that, yeah. So it was a kind of choreographed death almost, as only he could do. Do you want to go back to the bluebird image? It's quite a difficult lecture to give because one is sitting there kind of dragging out memories from 20 years ago and thinking of moments that were highlights and trying to give you a kind of a history. And I'm sure, that there's flashes that I can come back to. For instance, in Schnabel's studio, there I was with his 10-year-old daughter chatting, and the next thing, and then we start, she was all excited, and she started singing one of his great songs, the Ground Control to Major Tom. And the next thing, this voice booms across this giant space of Schnabel's, and it's him singing, Space, his famous song. And we kind of shook in our boots. But anyway, yeah, I might just have little flashbacks like that as we go along.
Did you make a lot of money from
No, this is a very interesting question. So that 15,000 rand is what I, sell a small print for. It's a ridiculously small amount of money to get for an original painting that Bowie painted half of. And I've discovered since, Brian Eno and I did a large collaboration of sound paintings where you actually listen to sounds, which you have paintings that illustrate sounds on earphones, which we showed at the Venice Biennale. 2 were stolen, but I don't think we sold a single one. And when Basquiat and Warhol did their collaboration, they also didn't sell a single one, and they were both major artists. One wasn't a musician and the other an artist. Excuse me, when I did the collaboration with Dave Matthews, it was a huge collaboration, and we worked with, ironically, one of Warhol's former printers, silkscreen master in his 70s, who still was the last guy in New York working with oil-based silkscreen. Massive edition of work of really high-quality silkscreens, and he's got an unbelievably huge fan base in America. Dave Matthews is a proper superstar. But his market buys T-shirts and caps and albums. They don't buy $2,000 prints. So I've discovered with collaborations, specifically with musicians, no matter how famous they are, that from a business point of view, it's a disaster. And that actually, one should enter in future when I might be working with Laurie Anderson. And I know up front not to even think about from a commercial point of view, but and Bowie stressed this while I was working with him. This is about process, not about the product and the business side of it. They're in storage in New York right now, and I've spoken to his manager, his people, and they said they're still winding up his estate, but there is interest to put the work together and set up a touring show around the world, which would be more, again, orientated towards exhibiting rather than selling.
Are they jointly owned?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Have you spoken to all these other paintings from New York?
Well, actually, there's one that's missing. Where's I suppose we lost it. But I did sorry, again, I'll answer your question. I mean, a lot of his personal paintings, I should think the family has retained. But I did do a large sculpture, which somehow got lost in the slide presentation. But I was in Churchhaven about a few years ago, and I saw a flamingo flying. And there was this long neck and the body in the middle and these long legs at the back. And I thought that's it inspired me to do this sculpture where I had this long piece of wood, literally from here to the clock, which I carved with ballet shoes at either end, and then put this bending life-size body doing the back bend like this. And I had it flat, and I sent the picture to him. He really liked it. And then I hadn't thought of putting it up, which I then did. And I said to him, he liked it, and he said, I said, I'm going to make an edition, are you going to do this? And he said, how many do you want an edition? I rather, in order to kind of appeal to him, normally I do editions of kind of 8. And I said 3, just to make sure. And he said, okay, he wanted it, and he bought it from me, the first bronze. So I called it Bowie Dancer. But I said, do you like it lying flat or up? And we both decided it's much better straight up. And so we did the Bowie Dancer, and it was sent off to New York. That was about a year or 2 before he died. And I'm glad to say the family decided to keep it in the big sale of the collection of work at Sotheby's that they had just after he died. So that is on his estate north of New York still.
How do you approach collaborating with the guy like Bowie? Is it a bit awkward?
Well, of course, as I said, he made me feel very much at ease, and it was my suggestion when he came to do this interview with me for Modern Painters magazine, instead of just sitting with a microphone, that we painted together, and he immediately liked that idea. And of course, he is and was a great collaborator. Him and Eno worked over the years on lots of different things. He loved collaborating. And of course, this is what musicians do. Musicians jam together. They effectively collaborate the whole time. And as I find as a painter, it can be quite lonely sometimes. So I do enjoy collaboration. And then there was always the thing with all the musicians I've worked with. They all wanted to be painters, and I wanted to be a rock star. So it was a perfect union. That's correct, yeah. So there's actually...
Now, do you think, there might be problems like that with the form of Bowie and his paintings?
The first point of the point that you made is that when we were in Schnabel's studio, because of that, Schnabel was rattling off a whole lot of Basquiat-looking paintings for his film. And then what did you say about using his painting?
Who controls the Bowie estate around his painting?
Oh, it'll be his family. I mean, and that won't be only his painting. You must understand, he did the most extraordinary thing business-wise, which was considered to be genius by Wall Street, by selling futures in his past music earnings, and raised $1 billion for himself. Yeah. No, he was at art school. Yeah, that's what he said. He started off at art school. Music-wise, I should imagine, yes. Yeah. Cancer. I'm not sure. Could have been lungs. He was a smoker for many years. Yeah. Was it liver? Yeah.
And you talk about his painting in Berlin when he was in Berlin.
So I know that I think he was doing, I'm not sure if before or during, an enormous amount of cocaine then. And I think, I read somewhere that he escaped, he kind of went to Berlin to get away from that and to try and get away from his life. He did tell me something extraordinary. He said that his son, when he was 6 or 7, said, "Wow, Dad, you look just like David Bowie." So I think he tried to get away from all of that by going and living in Berlin kind of low key. And I'm not sure, that out of Berlin, I know, came his most commercially successful album, which one? No, it wasn't Heroes, that was a song. It was the one with China Girl on, where he's a white suit with big shoulder pads on. I'm not very good at remembering the name, but it came out of Berlin.
Did he have more than one child?
Yes, he had a boy with his first wife, who he loathed. I said, "What was she like?" He said, "It's like having to buy someone you really hate a house." And then in the Outside album, he takes her. He did an extraordinary kind of... He'd invented these characters. You must try and listen or find the Outside album. It's brilliant. But he invented various personas. In one of them, he was a great collector of Bomberg, the artist. And he had quite a few. He showed me of his paintings. And he invented himself as a kind of Bomberg character, describing himself as a broken man and living above a shop in some little part of London and wanting to meet another broken man. And no, he came from Birmingham. Not Birmingham. What's it called in England? Because he's born there. Yeah, he's probably born there. He did tell me that his sister had disappeared. When he was quite young, and the Daily News, one of the newspapers, tracked her down living in the Middle East as a Muslim lady. But then he had this son who had just when we were working, becoming a doctorate in philosophy, and is now a filmmaker, and he'd managed to keep him out of the limelight successfully. And then they had a lovely daughter called Alexander with Iman, who's now about 14. Yeah.
Through Bowie?
No, I actually met Eno completely separately. We were showing on the same exhibition in London about 89, or early 90s. There was some kind of really crazy woman who was showing our work called Jibby Bean, and it was using photographs of our work projected onto the side of a building, again, very early cell phone technology. And he came and paid me the compliment saying it was a nice piece on the show. It was one of my Li Pingxing characters, and we chatted and got on very well then, but we didn't immediately do anything. And then I bumped into him about 5 or 6 years later in London in a restaurant, and he said, come and look at this, and took me back to his studio and showed me a TV that you could draw on and then make prints from it. And then he said, well, what about these offcuts from this hardware store down the road, and what about we go and get these offcuts and start painting on them? And so we started what has become a major collaboration from there. But it was actually his suggestion that we work together in that case. And then with Dave Matthews, he's been a friend of my brother's since he was young. You know, he's from South Africa. And again, you know, Dave, you must understand all three of these men really want to be painters, and so that's what I do. And so, you know, he suggested that we painted together as well, David, and that's where that happened.
But you must have a quality that appeals to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think.
That's quite a lot of, to connect and to there must be some quality that you have that's it.
Well, I'm glad you said. I mean, I suppose there might be, you know, and I suppose I've got a similar sense of humour. I like to think, I wish I had as much a brilliance as Bowie and Eno in terms of genius, you know. But I do have a kind of light approach to life, which all three of them really liked. I mean, Dave Matthews said it was the best 2 weeks or 3 weeks of his life. We just had a lot of fun together, really, and be very free and go really fast. A lot of laughter. And Bowie was hilarious. He described going to this loony bin in Berlin, where they had again referring to my brother who was in Falkenberg for 26 years. They had a kind of art section in this mental asylum, where it was like alive and flowers and colour, and everywhere else was grey and terrible. And he describes going to visit this place and this woman going like, you know, and imitating this woman who he saw in the loony bin. But then that actually inspired us to start a project at Falkenberg, which was still running, where they do art, to try and uplift them from the horrors of their condition.
And do they also have, you know, there's a great, I don't know, it's called a meme or whatever about the creative process, saying, you know, at the first stages I can do this, the next stages I'm not sure that's going well, the next stages I'm shit, the next stages I'm great, and the next stages, you know, it's always...
There's always that. I mean, that always happens. I find if I'm...
As kind of the average person, or do they just kind of trust the process, or how they...
A lot of it's to do with the process. I've noticed, especially with Eno and Bowie, they're intrigued with the process and what transpires all the time. And Bowie, I mean, Eno set his life up in the most amazing way, where it's almost like a baby in a playpen being protected to do his thing. He's completely unmaterialistic. He must be outrageously wealthy. He has a bicycle, and he's had the same flat in Bladbrook Groves for 40 years, a 2-bedroom flat. He did buy his ex-wife a farm in Oxford in order to plant 5,000 oak trees, and a beautiful apartment in St. Petersburg because she likes Russia. But that was for his ex-wife. He's more, you know, I mean, so we were in his studio, and in his studio in London, there's the bookshelves, and high up, and the top of bookshelves collecting dust is a row of about 10 gold Grammys. And then he wanted to clear out, because he drove him nuts, all the work that we'd had all over the place. He wanted to clear it out, get rid of it, space it. And there was this box of CDs with original takes of him working with U2. And he said, throw it. And one of his assistants said, Brian, I think this, I'm just going to put it there because it's going to end up on eBay in 5 seconds if we throw it outside. But, and then he comes up to me with a little kind of, what did he have, a kind of a roller thing, and he rolls it on my back. And then he goes and he's playing his piano, and he's put it in his mouth, and he's putting it against the piano like Beethoven when he was deaf. And then you realize that he's like a kid playing, and he's set his whole life up to be this creative kid. And I could take a big leaf out of his book when it comes to that. I think Stuart, my dear assistant, will agree with that. Hey, Stu?
Sorry, I want to ask you, we lived in London for quite a long time, and I was once in Harrods. I think it was Harrods. I didn't go there very often, but in the basement there was a big screen, and it was a video. It was a video. It wasn't a picture. It was all very abstract, and I think there was some music playing. My kid was like 1. It was in a pram, and it was an exhibition that was on at that stage. It was probably about 12 years ago. Is that? This is stab in the dark, obviously, but it wasn't one of your collaborations.
No, that would have been too early because we only did our show at Venice, was it 4 years ago? And that was the first time we had exhibited our collaboration, yeah.
Was he a collector of South African art?
Sorry?
Was he a collector of other South African artists?
Have I worked with?
No, Bowie himself.
No, he didn't.
South African art or other.
Not in South Africa, no. And in fact, I can't think of. I mean, he did work with Damien Hirst at the same time as I. They did spin paintings together, and they'd planned to do, which I think Damien then picked up on his big show in Venice in the last Biennale. Because he told me that they planned to buy this island in the kind of North Sea and bury a minotaur there or something, and there was this kind of crazy thing. And of course, then Damien did do this thing of this kind of hidden treasure theme work on the last Biennale. So he was in touch. He was working with him at the same time as I here, but not in South Africa.
Could you tell us more about number 6? I really like that.
Yes, I mean that's one of the pieces we did in New York, and I was just thinking the same actually. When I was looking at the slide, I hadn't noticed how nice the eyes were. So I mean, again, my process of working, which we adopted throughout the collaboration, with that most of these images, apart from the portraits and the what was called Olympic knifeman above that, was, I call it cloud painting, and in my studio I just make a whole lot of marks on a whole lot of paintings. I make a mess, which I then have to sort out, and I then look for a figurative image in the abstract form. And I do believe that one is accessing one's subconscious in the process. I call it dream reality because if you well, they did to quite an extent, but not necessarily with the same approach. But what I do think is that when you do dream, if you try, and I've discussed this quite a lot with Brian Eno because he's intrigued by the whole process of dreaming, and it's one of the kind of tangents he's gone off on. But if you think about when you dream, there's a whole lot of abstract ideas that come into your head which don't make necessarily sense in the daytime. You said, my God, I was driving a tractor across a strawberry field with my grandmother on it's like crazy stuff, which is formulated by abstract thoughts in your head into a figurative dream form. And I'm doing that, or we were doing that. That is generally how I work. And of course, Michelangelo, this is nothing new. Michelangelo talked about the landscape in an ink blot, or the world in an ink blot. I mean, and if you look at a lot of great painters going back, that you'll see that they've come about by Michelangelo released David from a block of marble. He saw David in that block of marble. So it's nothing new, but that's how we were working.
But before you started doing your paintings together, did you even have a conversation about it?
Yeah, I mean, David was a bit more concerned with that because I don't work with preconcepts. I never do a commission, for example, because I can't work, as I say, unless my black woman alter ego comes into it, which is a whole different story. She does preconceived work, but I don't. So he did say at one stage, "Are we going to do spaceships?" I said, "I'm sure we're going to do spaceships."
And do you get in each other's way as you cross
No,
the
no,
fingers?
no,
Choosing the colours?
no. I mean, in fact, when I did the portrait of him, that one, 9, he really liked that. And when I sprayed those gold things on, he said, "Stop." That was the only time he said that, because he didn't want me to bugger it up.
So he was interviewing you, yes? How long was it between him interviewing you and you then collaborating with him?
Well,
For 2 weeks.
no. So the interview that he first did in Cape Town, I had suggested that we paint together during the interview. So he put his tape recorder on while we did the picture on my T-shirt together. So, and then after having done a couple of, I think we did 3 or 4 pictures like this in Cape Town, he then invited me to come and do this large collaboration in New York that followed.
What was the time frame?
Oh, I would say 2 or 3 months.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Where is the dancing Jesus?
The gold dancing Jesus, that particular one I've done, this is 2 of 12. The first one, that particular one is in a private collection in a museum in China, and I've got the second one in my bedroom. Well, I shouldn't say that too loudly because it goes into the safe every time I leave on holiday. It's about that big, yeah. But I mean, I did a whole body of work around the dancing Jesus. I did a performance which started off with I wish I could suddenly click and show you the performance. I'm sure someone can, but I'm not technically very able. But I did a performance based on Lord of the Dance, a jazzed up version of the Anglican hymn, Lord of the Dance. It's about the resurrection, of course. So I've spoken to a bishop friend, and they're kind of slightly iffy about me tampering with this iconographic image of a man being tortured. Which I've had problems with all my life, and I, to this day, cannot understand when someone says Jesus died for your sins. I still don't grasp that one. So I took the nails out of his hands, the thorns out of his head, and made him dance. And he's risen from. And in fact, an old bishop friend did say to me that so much as the emphasis of Christianity shouldn't be on the crucifixion, it should be on the resurrection. And I then believe that the resurrection is not the arrival of the Messiah, an individual who's mobbed at an airport. I believe that the resurrection is a consciousness across humanity. So I did, so as I say, I've done editions. I've done them in pure silver and also in bronze, which I then have put bright blue Yves Klein color patina on. I've done those as well. So I've done all of those in this particular one. But as I say, I've done a large body of work. I've done the performance where he comes out dressed as Jesus and does. I had this young dancer do it for me originally, and I have done these 2 life-size bronze figures similar to this. One of which is now in a collection in Holland, and the others in London. And unfortunately, that chap had addiction problems and couldn't deliver when I was invited to Copenhagen to do the performance in a festival. And then it was really weird because I'm going off a tangent here, but this woman approached me on behalf of the German government to come and do a whole tour of Germany with this performance. And when my first dancer couldn't make it, they then suggested that I got this other dancer. So I went up to Johannesburg to effectively audition him, and he was hopeless. I did a video of him. He was more ballet. He didn't know how to do the Charleston, which was involved in this dance. And I phoned and I said, "There's no way this guy can do this dance. I'm going to do it myself." And I said, "I'll dance my way out of this." And they said, "Sorry, the whole show's off because the whole reason this whole thing's happening is because," and I really wasn't aware of this, but the dancer I happened to choose was black. and the guy who I had turned down in the audition, who wasn't up to, was also black, and I think a boyfriend of the woman, whatever it was, and the whole thing was called off. So it's now sitting in my storeroom and has ever since. But that's a whole body of work, of paintings and sculptures and the performance around the resurrection, the dancing Jesus. So it might emerge one day. The silence is deafening.
And would you compare David Bowie with Freddie Mercury?
Not necessarily, no. Everybody said, I haven't seen this incredible film, and I sadly missed his performance at Sun City when he came here. But
Were they very different?
well, I didn't know Freddie Mercury, and they're both rock gods. But I can't. I mean, I've said there's much more in common with Eno than Freddie, who was this unbelievable performer. Of course, David was too. But the thing David has done so many. I don't think Freddie Mercury acted in films. I mean, there was Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, where he acts as a prisoner of war. It's got nothing to do with being a rock star. Well, I hope you're all happy. Now you must go and buy the Outside album. Thanks very much for coming. How are you? So good to see you. Far too long.
How are you?
Very well, and you?
Enjoyed it.
Yeah, good. I'm so glad you could make it. Yeah, that was fun.